The Asbestos Exposure. Susan Macgregor stood by the front door of her home in London. It was the early 1950s. She was a small child waiting for her father to return from the factory. He spent his days wrapping hot pipes in insulation in order to stop heat from escaping. He walked through the door wearing his heavy work coat. It was covered in a fine, gray dust. He took the coat off and shook it, releasing a small cloud of particles into the hallway air. Susan ran to him. She wrapped her arms around his waist and buried her face in the fabric of his jacket. She inhaled deeply, smelling the industrial scent of his day. The dust was soft and white, looking like snow on his shoulders and down the front of his overalls. The dust was asbestos. Millions of microscopic needle-like fibers floated into Susan's nose and throat. They traveled down her windpipe and settled deep in the lining of her lungs. Her body could not dissolve them. They were sharp and durable. Over the next 40 years, the fibers acted like tiny splinters. They irritated the cells every time she took a breath. This constant scratching caused thick scar tissue to build up slowly. The lining of her lungs stiffened and lost its ability to stretch. Decades later, in 2009, Susan began to feel short of breath. She went to the doctor. The asbestos fibers had triggered a rare cancer called mesothelioma. The tumor encased her lung in a hard shell, preventing it from expanding. She struggled to draw air into her body. Each breath grew smaller and tighter, as if her chest were bound from the inside. She died in the hospital, her lungs locked in by the asbestos that she had breathed as a child. The Paracetamol Overdose. Desiree Phillips sat in her kitchen in Wales. It was 2011. She had just undergone a minor surgery to remove a benign lump. The procedure left her in considerable discomfort. She reached for a bottle of common painkillers. The label said to take 2, but the pain was sharp. She took a few more than the recommended dose, believing that it would help her sleep. She repeated this over the next few days. She felt fine at first because the drug suppresses pain effectively. Inside her body, her liver was overwhelmed. The liver is a chemical factory that produces a specific molecule called glutathione to neutralize poisons. But the factory has a limit. When Desiree took the extra pills, she drained the supply completely. The overdose tipped the balance. Her liver ran out of the tool that it needed to protect itself. The leftover drug turned into a toxic compound called NAPQI. This toxin began to destroy her liver cells one by one. There were no immediate symptoms. She walked around normally while her liver quietly died. 3 days later, her skin turned yellow. She felt sick and confused as toxins that her liver should have cleaned flooded her brain. She went to the hospital. The doctors found that her liver had stopped functioning entirely. Her blood couldn't clot. She lapsed into a coma as her brain swelled against her skull. She died 9 days after taking the extra pills. The hydrogen sulfide incident. A drainage pipe sat blocked under a residential street in Key Largo, Florida. It was a warm morning in January of 2017. Elway Gray, a utility worker, lifted the heavy iron cover of the manhole. He needed to inspect the blockage that was causing issues for the neighborhood. He climbed down the metal ladder into a dark, narrow space. The air inside was still and stale. The pipe was only 15 feet deep, but it was an enclosed space with no ventilation. The rotting vegetation and sewage had been fermenting in the stagnant water for weeks. The gas produced by this decay is heavier than air, so it settled at the bottom like an invisible pool. He reached the bottom rung and took a breath. He didn't smell anything. The gas, hydrogen sulfide, is famous for smelling like rotten eggs, but at high concentrations it paralyzes the olfactory nerves in the nose instantly. It struck his nervous system like a hammer. He inhaled a high concentration of the gas. It entered his blood and instantly stopped his cells from using oxygen. It blocked the mitochondria, the power plants of the cells. It was like flicking a switch. Elway collapsed silently into the water at the bottom. Above him, Lewis O'Keefe saw his partner fall. He shouted for help and climbed down the ladder to rescue him. He held his breath for the first few seconds, but the exertion forced him to inhale. He took one breath at the bottom and then collapsed on top of Elway. A third man, Robert Wilson, saw them both go down. Desperate to save them, he descended into the hole without a mask. The gas took him just as quickly. All 3 men lay in the narrow pipe. Their hearts stopped beating within minutes due to the lack of oxygen. They died together in the dark. The Antifreeze Mistake. Michael Kennedy walked into a garage in Bolton, England. It was September of 2000. He saw a bottle sitting on a workbench. It was an ordinary plastic soda bottle, repurposed by a mechanic without a warning label. It contained a bright green liquid. It looked like a soft drink. He was thirsty. He picked up the bottle and he drank a glass of the fluid. It tasted sweet, like syrup, somewhat like a lime cordial. He did not know that it was antifreeze. He finished the glass and left the garage, feeling normal. The liquid was ethylene glycol. Once it hit his stomach, his body began to break it down. His liver processed it the same way that it processes alcohol. The enzyme alcohol dehydrogenase converted the glycol into a toxic substance called oxalic acid. That compound mixed with the calcium in his blood. This mixture formed millions of tiny, sharp crystals. These crystals traveled through his bloodstream to his kidneys. They clogged the tiny filtering tubes inside of them. The sharp formations scraped through delicate tissue like ground glass. The organs began to bleed and shut down. His body tried to fight the rising acidity. He started to hyperventilate, gasping for air to clear the toxins. Michael felt drowsy and uncoordinated at first, and then he slipped into unconsciousness. The crystals blocked the flow of waste in his body. His blood became acidic. He fell into a deep coma as his brain failed. He died in the hospital only days after drinking the antifreeze, his kidneys no longer able to clear the acid from his blood. The Ammonia Leak. The Fernie Memorial Arena in British Columbia was quiet. It was October of 2017. 3 men named Wayne, Lloyd, and Jason were in the mechanical room. It was a tight, enclosed space packed with insulated pipes and loud compressors. They were troubleshooting a problem with the ice-making machine. The system was well past its lifespan. Wayne stood near the chiller unit checking a valve. The machine vibrated with the rhythm of the compressor. Inside the steel tubes, the coolant was flowing under high pressure. A small seal inside the chiller unit gave way. Years of vibration had slowly weakened the metal until it had finally split. A pinhole opened up. The liquid anhydrous ammonia blasted out of the hole. It boiled instantly upon hitting the air, expanding into a massive white cloud. This form of ammonia contains no water. It is a gas that is chemically desperate to find moisture. The white fog swallowed the men before they could even turn towards the exit. They inhaled the gas. The ammonia attacked the water in their eyes, throats, and lungs. It reacted with the moisture in their tissues to create a burning chemical called ammonium hydroxide. The gas hunted for any wet surface it could find. Wayne dropped his wrench onto the concrete. The men grabbed their throats as their tissue burned. Their airways swelled shut immediately, sealing off their lungs. They could not see as the gas had damaged their eyes. It turned the moisture on their corneas into a caustic alkali. They stumbled blindly and collapsed onto the floor. The room became a toxic chamber. An alarm blared in the hallway, and the sharp scent of ammonia leaked under the doorframe. Firefighters arrived, but they couldn't enter. The concentration of gas was too high for standard gear. They had to wait. The 3 men died of chemical burns and suffocation on the floor of the mechanical room before anyone could even reach the door. The Benzene Wash. John Thompson worked in a petrochemical plant in the United States. For decades, starting in the 1960s, his routine was always the same. At the end of a shift, his hands were covered in grease and oil. He walked over to a bucket filled with a clear liquid called benzene. It was an excellent solvent. He dipped his hands in and he scrubbed them clean. The liquid felt cool on his skin. It evaporated quickly, leaving his hands dry, and then he went home. But the benzene did not just wash away the grease. It soaked through the pores of his skin and entered his bloodstream. It then traveled to the center of his bones, and this is where the body makes new blood cells. This benzene slowly poisoned this factory inside of his bones. damaged the DNA of the stem cells that produce blood. The factory finally went silent. Over the years, his bone marrow stopped working. It could no longer produce the red blood cells that he needed to carry oxygen, or the white cells that he needed to fight infection. He grew weak and pale. Doctors diagnosed him with leukemia, a blood cancer that's linked to long-term benzene exposure. His immune system collapsed. He died from the failure of his blood, caused by the solvent that he had used to clean his hands. We assume that the things we touch, taste, and breathe are safe because they're familiar. But a single molecule can set irreversible damage in motion. Life is fragile. Treat today like it matters.